de masterpiece. The canvas stood in the center of the room, illuminated by the soft glow of sunlight filtering through the windows. It was a stunning work of art. Every stroke of the brush seemed to pulse with life. Emotions poured onto the surface in vivid colors and intricate details. It was no wonder the painting was garnering attention, quickly gaining recognition as a masterpiece. But for the man standing before it, this artwork was not just a beautiful creation. It was a revelation, a truth he had not been ready to confront. He had watched his wife pour her soul into this painting for weeks. Each day, she retreated into her studio, emerging late at night with her eyes tired but her heart seemingly lighter. She had told him it was the most important work of her career, something that came from a deep place within her. And he believed her. As an artist, he understood the need to lose oneself in the process, to let emotions dictate the creation. But now, as he gazed upon the finished work, he realized there was something he hadn't anticipated. At first glance, the painting appeared to be a romantic masterpiece. A man and a woman, their figures entwined in a dance of passion and tenderness, the love between them evident in every brushstroke. But as he examined the details, the shape of the man's jaw, the way his hand rested on the woman's waist, the gaze they shared, it became clear that the man in the painting was not him. The realization hit him like a tidal wave, stealing the breath from his lungs. This man, this figure in the painting, was someone else, someone his wife had painted with such devotion, such intimacy, that it could only mean one thing. This wasn't just a work of art. This was a confession. Suddenly, the room felt suffocating. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the painting, couldn't deny the emotions surging inside him. Jealousy, betrayal, confusion. How had he missed it? How had he not seen the signs, the late nights, the distant looks, the way she spoke of her art as if it were her greatest love? And now, this. The masterpiece that had brought her recognition and acclaim was a monument to a love that was not his. It felt the walls closing in around him, the air thick with unspoken truths. How long had she been harboring these feelings? How long had she been painting this other man in her heart, all while he believed they were building a life together? His hands trembled as he reached out, almost as if touching the canvas would confirm his worst fears. But he stopped, pulling back before his fingers made contact. The weight of the betrayal settled heavily on his chest. This wasn't just about the painting. It was about what it represented, the unraveling of a relationship, the hidden desires that had been growing in the shadows, the silent distance that had crept into their lives. And now, as the world admired the beauty of the masterpiece, he stood in its shadow, wondering how much of their life had been a lie. The painting was a masterpiece, yes. But it was also the beginning of the end. The eyes on the canvas. It wasn't just the form of the man in the painting that haunted him, it was the eyes. Those eyes, staring back at him from the canvas, were too familiar, too full of meaning. They were painted with such precision, such emotion, that they seemed to have a life of their own. Every time he looked at them, it was as if they were looking back, watching him, judging him. Their eyes were where the truth lay. Not just in their likeness, but in the way they seemed to speak volumes. They carried secrets he wasn't supposed to know, emotions he wasn't supposed to see. And yet, there they were, captured forever on the canvas, telling a story of a love he wasn't a part of. At first, he had tried to convince himself that he was overreacting, that he was seeing things that weren't there. Maybe it was just his imagination, fueled by the insecurity creeping into his heart. But the more he stared, the more undeniable it became. The eyes in the painting belonged to someone real. They belonged to the man who had somehow captured his wife's heart. It couldn't help but wonder how long she had been carrying these feelings for this man. How long had she been painting him, not just in her art, but in her mind? And why hadn't he noticed? It felt a chill run down his spine as he imagined her, day after day, standing before the canvas, pouring her affection into those eyes, into every delicate stroke. As he traced the outlines with his gaze, the intimacy between the figures became even clearer. This wasn't just an abstract representation of love. It was a declaration, a confession hidden in plain sight. The hands, the smiles, the way their bodies curved toward each other, it was all too deliberate, too personal. And yet, the most haunting part of it all were those eyes, which seemed to follow him wherever he went. He knew those eyes didn't belong to a stranger. They weren't a figment of his wife's artistic imagination. No, they belonged to someone real, someone who had left a mark on her heart. And that realization cut deeper than he could have anticipated. The days that followed were filled with silence. His wife, proud of her work, continued to receive praise and admiration from critics and art lovers alike. The painting was quickly becoming a sensation. Yet, amidst all the external success, a growing distance settled between them. She hadn't noticed the change in him, or maybe she had, but chose not to acknowledge it. Either way, he was left alone with his thoughts, his suspicions, and the unshakable presence of those eyes. Every time he walked past the painting, it was there, the gaze, the unspoken connection between his wife and the man in the canvas. It was as if they were sharing something he could never understand, something he was never meant to be part of, and with each passing day, the weight of that realization became harder to bear. The eyes on the canvas were no longer just a part of the painting. They were a reminder of what had been lost, of the love that had slipped away without him even realizing it. And now, as the world celebrated the beauty of his wife's masterpiece, he was left to grapple with the painful truth behind it. Those eyes were the key to everything. They were the silent witnesses to a story he was only beginning to uncover. And no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't escape their gaze. Fame and recognition. The painting had taken on a life of its own. What started as a quiet piece of work in his wife's studio had now become the centerpiece of a growing cultural phenomenon. Art galleries were clamoring to display it, magazines featured it on their covers, and art critics couldn't stop praising its depth, its emotional power, its striking beauty. It had become more than just a painting. It had become a symbol of something larger, something the world admired, even if he couldn't. Everywhere they went, people wanted to talk about the painting. His wife was constantly being invited to events, interviewed by journalists, asked to share the inspiration behind her creation. And with each public appearance, her fame only grew. She was no longer just an artist, she was the artist, celebrated for her masterpiece. People marveled at how she had captured such an intimate, raw expression of love on canvas. The world seemed captivated by it. But amidst the applause and the accolades, he felt more isolated than ever. He stood by her side at every event, every gallery opening, every interview, but all he could think about was the truth behind the painting. While the world celebrated its beauty, he was haunted by the story it told, one of a love that wasn't his, a connection between his wife and another man. With each new compliment, each new article that praised her genius, the weight of his secret knowledge grew heavier. He watched as she smiled for the cameras, basking in the glow of her newfound fame, while he silently grappled with the emotions that churned inside him. Was this what success looked like? Was this what it felt like to be standing on the sidelines of someone else's dream? As the painting gained more recognition, it began to define their relationship in ways he couldn't have predicted. They were no longer just a couple, they were the artist and her husband, inseparable in the public eye, yet worlds apart in private. The tension that once felt flattering now seemed suffocating, a constant reminder of the truth he couldn't speak aloud. And no one seemed to notice. No one saw the tension that simmered beneath the surface, hidden behind her smile and his polite nods. The more famous the painting became, the more invisible he felt. It was as though the success that should have brought them closer had instead driven a wedge between them, leaving him stranded in a sea of unanswered questions and unspoken pain. He couldn't look at the painting without seeing the man in it, couldn't listen to the praise without feeling the sting of betrayal. The world adored her, But he was left to grapple with the reality that the masterpiece everyone loved had cost him his peace. Fame had brought recognition, yes. But it had also brought the undeniable truth to light, a truth that now hung between them, unspoken but ever-present. And with each passing day, he found it harder to navigate the space between what the world saw and what he knew to be true. The suspicious silence. As the whirlwind of fame continued to swirl around them, a strange silence settled between them at home. It wasn't the comfortable kind of quiet that once existed in their relationship, the kind where they didn't need words to feel connected. No, this silence was heavy, filled with questions that neither of them dared to ask. It was a silence that echoed louder than any argument ever could. He found himself replaying every conversation, every interaction with his wife, looking for signs of what was happening beneath the surface. There were no fights, no confrontations, no outward expressions of discontent. But the absence of those things was precisely what unsettled him. She was too calm, too composed, as if she was carefully guarding something, holding back words she didn't want to say. At first, he told himself that maybe it was just the pressure of her newfound fame. Perhaps she was exhausted from all the public attention, too tired to engage in deep conversations at home. But the more he thought about it, the more that excuse felt hollow. This wasn't about fatigue or stress, it was something deeper. Her silence wasn't just a lack of words, it was a barrier, an invisible wall that kept him at a distance. He began to notice little things. The way she avoided his gaze when he asked her about the painting, the way she changed the subject whenever the conversation drifted too close to the man in the portrait. It was as if she was afraid that speaking about it might unravel something too delicate to handle. And yet, in that silence, her true emotions seemed to linger, just out of reach. Nights became the hardest. Lying next to her, he felt the physical distance between them grow, even when their bodies were close. The air was thick with unspoken tension, a sense that something was wrong, but neither of them wanted to be the first to break the silence. Every word felt like a potential spark, one that could ignite a fire they didn't prepare to face. He started to question everything. Was she waiting for him to ask? Was she hoping he would confront her, force the truth out of her so she wouldn't have to say it herself? Or was she simply avoiding the inevitable, pretending that the life they had before the painting could still exist? The silence gnawed at him, pulling at the edges of his sanity. It was the kind of silence that allowed doubts to fester, feeding his insecurities and suspicions. In the quiet, his mind wandered to dark places, imagining all the things she might be hiding, all the truths she wasn't willing to share. And yet, each time he opened his mouth to ask, the words caught in his throat, swallowed by the weight of his fear. Didn't they want to know? Not really. Because once the silence was broken, once the truth was out in the open, there would be no going back. And so, they continued their lives in this strange limbo, where everything appeared normal on the outside, but inside, the silence grew louder and more unbearable with each passing day. The suspicious silence was more than just a lack of communication, it was a ticking time bomb, waiting for the moment when it would finally explode. An unexpected encounter. The silence between them had become routine, a daily reminder of the distance that now separated their lives. He had grown used to it, or so he thought, until the day everything changed with a chance encounter he never saw coming. It was supposed to be an ordinary afternoon. He had stepped out of the house to clear his mind, tired of the constant tension that had built up between them. The city streets, buzzing with life, usually offered him some form of distraction. But that day, nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to witness. He had been walking aimlessly when he spotted her across the street. At first, he thought his mind was playing tricks on him. After all, she was supposed to be at a gallery meeting, busy with the whirlwind of her career. But there she was, standing in front of a cafe, laughing, talking, with a man he instantly recognized. The man from the painting. His heart stopped. Time seemed to slow as he stood frozen, watching the two of them. She looked different, more relaxed, more alive than she had been in months. Her laughter was genuine, her smile unforced. It was a version of her he hadn't seen in so long, one he almost didn't recognize anymore. And it wasn't him who had brought that out of her. It was him. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't some casual acquaintance. This was the man she had painted with such passion, the one whose eyes had haunted him for weeks. And now, seeing them together, everything fell into place. The suspicious silence, the avoidance, the unspoken tension, it all made sense in that one agonizing moment. He felt the urge to confront them, to demand answers, but his legs wouldn't move. Instead, he stood there, watching from a distance as they talked, oblivious to the world around them. It was as if he was witnessing something private, something he wasn't meant to see, and yet, he couldn't tear his eyes away. They were close, too close. The kind of closeness that spoke of familiarity, of history. He didn't need to hear their conversation to know what was happening. The way they looked at each other, the ease with which they interacted, told him everything he needed to know. This was the truth he had been avoiding, staring him in the face. After what felt like an eternity, they stood up, still laughing as they walked away together, disappearing into the crowded street. And he was left standing there, numb, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. The betrayal he had suspected but never wanted to confront was now undeniable. She hadn't just painted him, she had been with him, and maybe still was. The unexpected encounter shattered the fragile sense of normalcy he had clung to for so long. There was no going back now. The truth was out, whether he wanted to accept it or not. And the worst part was, he hadn't even been the one to discover it. It had found him, in the most painful way possible. Silent confrontation. He returned home that evening, his mind still reeling from what he had witnessed. Every fiber of his being wanted to explode with anger, to demand answers, to confront her in the most direct way possible. But when he walked through the door and saw her sitting quietly in their living room, he felt an overwhelming sense of restraint. She looked up and smiled at him, that same calm, collected smile she had worn so many times before. It was as if nothing had changed, as if the weight of what he had seen had no place in their shared reality. But he couldn't unsee it, couldn't forget the closeness she had shared with him earlier that day. The tension in the room was palpable, but neither of them said a word. He sat across from her, watching her intently, waiting for any sign that she might bring it up, that she might confess. But nothing came. She was as composed as ever, her silence like a wall between them. He wanted to scream, to break the barrier, to force the truth out of her. But something held him back. The betrayal was already too deep, and he feared what would happen if he voiced it. If he spoke the words, if he acknowledged what he had seen, it would become real, unavoidable. And he wasn't sure he was ready to face that reality just yet. Instead, he chose the path of silent confrontation. His eyes bore into hers, searching for any crack in her facade, any flicker of guilt or remorse. But she remained steady, unmoved, as if she were a stranger sitting across from him instead of the woman he had built his life with. The silence between them stretched on, thick and suffocating. Each second felt like an eternity, filled with unspoken accusations and hidden truths. It was a game, one in which neither of them wanted to be the first to speak. It was daring her to admit it, while she waited for him to either reveal what he knew or let it slip away into the void of unasked questions. Every breath he took was heavy with the weight of his unspoken pain, but her expression gave nothing away. She acted as though the distance between them wasn't growing wider with every passing moment, as though there weren't invisible daggers in the air between them. Finally, she broke the silence with a simple question, one so mundane that it almost drove him mad. "How was your day?" The casualness of it sent a surge of frustration through him, but he swallowed it down, refusing to give him fine. He replied, his voice tight, laced with the tension of all the things left unsaid. He watched her closely, hoping for some reaction, some hint that she was aware of the storm brewing inside him. Bat no ni kami. She smiled again, the same serene, unreadable smile, and turned back to her book, as though everything was perfectly normal. The confrontation had come and gone without a single word of truth exchanged, and yet the room was thick with the weight of all that had passed between them. It was a silent battle, one that would continue until one of them was brave enough to shatter the fragile peace they had built on lies. And he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep pretending. De revelación. The weight of the silence between them had grown unbearable. Days passed, and though they still shared the same space, their connection had frayed to the point of breaking. He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, the image of her laughing with that man replayed in his mind. The confrontation had never fully come, and yet the truth was suffocating him. One evening, when the tension in the air was at its thickest, something shifted. She came home late, and there was something different about her demeanor, a heaviness that hadn't been there before. She walked into the room, not with her usual calmness, but with a visible unease. It was as though she had been carrying a secret for too long, and now it was ready to spill out. He sat at the dining table, watching her intently, his heart racing. This was it. The moment he had dreaded and anticipated in equal measure. She stood at the threshold for a moment, as if gathering her thoughts, before finally stepping forward. Her eyes met his, and for the first time in weeks, they were filled with something other than distance. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It was a simple sentence, but it felt like the world had shifted beneath him. Inadit, too afraid to speak, too afraid to break the fragile thread that hung between them. She sat down across from him, her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them together. For a moment, she couldn't meet his eyes. Then, with a deep breath, she spoke. "The painting, it's not just art. It's not just something I created from my imagination. It's him." The words hung in the air like a confession, heavy and raw. He didn't move, didn't react, but inside, everything was crumbling. The truth he had suspected but refused to accept was now out in the open. She looked up at him, her eyes full of guilt and something else, regret. "I didn't want to hurt you," she continued. "But I've been carrying this for so long. It's more than just a painting. It's my past, my emotions. And I thought I could keep it separate from us, but I was wrong." It felt as though the room was spinning. His mind raced, trying to process the flood of information, but the only thing he could focus on was the betrayal that had always been right in front of him. The painting had been a window into her heart, and he had been too blind to see it for what it truly was. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Why did you let me believe it was just a painting? Why him?" She sighed, a long, weary sound, as though she had been holding this in for years. "Because I was scared. Scared of what it would mean for us. I didn't want to hurt you, and I thought, maybe if I kept it hidden, it would go away. But it doesn't. And now it's everywhere. In my art, in my life. I can't escape it anymore." The room fell into silence once again, but this time, it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the suffocating quiet they had lived in for weeks. It was a silence filled with truths finally spoken, with the weight of everything that had been held back. He looked at her, feeling a storm of emotions, anger, sadness, betrayal, but also a strange sense of relief. The truth, as painful as it was, had finally come to light. And now, he had to face it, no matter how much it hurt. The internal conflict. The revelation had shifted the ground beneath him, leaving him grappling with a storm of emotions. The weight of the truth about the painting and her past had unleashed a torrent of internal conflict, and he found himself caught in a web of confusion and pain. He spent days immersed in a haze of introspection, unable to escape the thoughts that plagued his mind. The image of her with him, the knowledge of their shared past, and the deceit that had unfolded before his eyes, all of it swirled together in a chaotic mix of anger and sorrow. It was haunted by the feeling of being betrayed not only by her but also by himself for not seeing the signs sooner. The internal struggle was relentless. Questioned everything he had believed about their relationship, the trust, the love, the commitment. Had it all been a facade? Were the moments of intimacy and connection nothing more than illusions built on lies? Each memory was now tainted by the knowledge of her hidden past, and he struggled to separate the genuine moments from the ones marred by deception. He found himself oscillating between fury and empathy. On one hand, he felt an intense rage at the betrayal, the sense of being deceived and manipulated. It was as if the foundation of their life together had been ripped out from under him, leaving him with nothing but the rubble of shattered trust. On the other hand, he couldn't ignore the deep well of empathy he felt for her. The pain she had endured, the fears she had faced, he understood that her actions had been driven by more than just malice. She had been grappling with her own demons, and in some twisted way, her secrecy was an attempt to protect both herself and him. The conflict within him grew as he debated the next steps. Should he confront her about every detail, seeking answers that might only deepen the wound? Or should he try to rebuild the trust that had been so violently fractured, attempting to salvage what remained of their relationship? The thought of moving forward without addressing the pain seemed impossible, but confronting the truth felt like an insurmountable challenge. Every decision he considered was fraught with complexity. The emotional turmoil left him feeling paralyzed, unable to take decisive action. He longed for clarity, but all he found was an ever-present fog of doubt and confusion. The internal conflict was not just about the betrayal but also about his own identity and how he fit into this new reality. In quiet moments alone, he reflected on the nature of forgiveness and the limits of trust. Could he ever fully forgive her? Could he trust her again? And more importantly, could he forgive himself for not seeing the truth sooner? These questions weighed heavily on his mind, each one adding another layer to the internal struggle that consumed him. As he faced the internal conflict, he realized that the path forward was not clear-cut. It required not only coming to terms with the betrayal but also understanding his own feelings and needs. The journey was far from over, and he knew that he had to confront his own demons before he could hope to resolve the issues between them. The public revelation. The public unveiling of the painting was a moment he had both anticipated and dreaded. It was the culmination of her artistic success, the pinnacle of her career, but it also represented the moment when the hidden truth would be exposed to the world. The event was highly anticipated, and the gallery was abuzz with excitement as guests and critics prepared to see the masterpiece that had been the talk of the art scene. He attended the exhibition with a heavy heart, knowing that the truth about the painting and its true subject was poised to become public knowledge. He had hoped for a moment of clarity, a way to reconcile the personal betrayal with the public spectacle, but as he walked through the gallery, it became evident that this was a moment beyond his control. The painting was the centerpiece of the exhibition, displayed prominently for all to see. Its beauty was undeniable, capturing the attention of everyone in the room. Yet, for him, the artwork was tainted with the knowledge of its real inspiration. The crowd marveled at its depth and emotion, completely unaware of the personal drama that lay behind it. As he stood in the gallery, he watched the reactions of the guests, admiration, awe, and appreciation. The painting was being celebrated as a groundbreaking work, a masterpiece that would likely cement her place in the art world. The contrast between the public acclaim and his own private anguish was striking. The painting, which had caused so much personal pain, was being hailed as a triumph. Then came the moment he had feared. An interviewer approached her with questions about the inspiration behind the painting. He watched from a distance, his heart pounding as she spoke with practiced ease, describing the painting in glowing terms while carefully avoiding any mention of its true origins. The interviewer was captivated by her responses, but for him, each word felt like a further betrayal. The public revelation of the painting didn't just mean that the truth about its inspiration was out. It also meant that the story of their relationship and the deceit had become part of the narrative of her success. The irony was bitter. The painting, which was supposed to be an intimate and personal expression, had now become a symbol of her professional triumph, while he was left grappling with the fallout of its true significance. In the midst of the event, he was approached by friends and acquaintances, all eager to offer their congratulations and admiration for her work. He managed polite smiles and responses, but inside, he was numb. The contrast between their enthusiasm and his internal turmoil felt like a cruel joke. They were celebrating a success that had, for him, become a symbol of betrayal and heartbreak. The public revelation of the painting was not just a moment of artistic achievement, it was also the climax of a personal crisis. The world saw only the beauty and the accolades, while he faced the raw, unfiltered reality of what had been hidden behind the canvas. The event marked a turning point, a moment when the personal and public spheres collided in a way that left him grappling with the complex aftermath of the truth coming to light. The final decision. The aftermath of the public revelation had left him in a state of profound uncertainty. The painting, now the center of a celebrated exhibition, had become a symbol of her triumph, but for him, it was a constant reminder of the betrayal he had endured. The lines between public admiration and personal pain had blurred, leaving him to confront a decision that would shape his future. In the quiet solitude of his thoughts, he grappled with the weight of his emotions. The public's perception of the painting contrasted sharply with his private experience of it. The world saw it as a masterpiece, a testament to her talent, but he saw it as a representation of a painful truth. The acclaim she received felt like a bitter irony, and he was left to navigate his feelings amidst the echo of applause. He faced a crucial crossroads, to confront the reality of his situation and decide whether to continue living in the shadow of the painting or to seek a path forward that would allow him to heal. The decision wasn't just about the painting, it was about his own emotional well-being and his future. Should he stay and try to reconcile with her, attempting to rebuild trust and salvage their relationship? The thought of working through the pain and attempting to forgive her was daunting. It would require confronting his own feelings of betrayal and navigating the complexities of their shared history. Could he ever truly move past the hurt and see their relationship with fresh eyes? Alternatively, should he choose to part ways, allowing himself the space to heal and start anew? The prospect of separation was both frightening and liberating. It would mean leaving behind the life they had built together and facing the unknown, but it also offered a chance for self-discovery and growth away from the shadow of the painting. As he weighed his options, he reflected on the journey that had led him to this point. The revelation of the painting had been a catalyst for deep introspection, forcing him to confront his own desires, fears, and hopes. The decision he faced was not just about the painting or her, it was about his own path forward and what he wanted for his life. In the end, he realized that the final decision had to be rooted in self-compassion and clarity. He needed to choose a path that would allow him to heal, grow, and find peace. Whether that meant reconciling and rebuilding or moving on and starting afresh, the choice had to align with his own well-being and future happiness. With a heavy heart and a clear mind, he made his decision. It was a step toward healing and self-discovery, a choice that would shape his journey in the days to come. The final decision was a testament to his strength and resilience, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Hello everyone! If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Your support helps us keep creating exciting and emotional content. See you in the next video.